Good day, grade 8 learners! Welcome to another exciting learning experience in studying language and communication, airing from Tala High School English Department. I am Ma'am Lizelle A. Clemente, your English teacher for today. To start with our lesson, let us have our target for today. Every author holds opinions that affect his or her discussion of an issue. Opinions that you as a reader must try to recognize and understand. Even the most seemingly factual report can carry an understated or implied judgment. Such judgments reflect an author's bias or preference for one side of an issue over another. In this lesson, you should be able to: number 1, examine biases for or against made by the author. Number 2, identify words, whether positive or negative, can reveal an author's bias. And number 3, identify biases in different readings by stating the author's connotations, loaded words, stereotypes, beige language, or generalizations, one-sided arguments, and personal opinion. Join me as we read the paragraph and answer the questions from your module. Make sure that you have your paper and pen in taking down notes. Read the paragraphs or sentences and answer the questions that follow. Number 1. My son's girlfriend is very rude. She calls so late at night, sometimes as late as 9 o'clock at night. Last week, she called me ate, so disrespectful. I quickly corrected her. Today, she came over for lunch and brought graham cake, without even asking if it was okay. What if I had already made a graham cake? To whom is the author biased against? Which words show the author's bias? Number 2. In the long history of the United States, there never was a black president. If Obama is elected, he would be the first Negro in the White House. To whom is the author biased against? Which words show the author's bias? Number 3. Since the resignation of the assistant CEO of the company last week, Mark Mercado, a manager, and Linda De Leon, a supervisor, and mother of 2, are vying for the position. To whom is the author biased against? Which words show the author's bias? Before we proceed to our lesson proper, let us have first our review from the last lesson in the second quarter. Looking back, recognizing the denotative and connotative meanings of words can help ensure that you understand exactly what an author is trying to say. The denotative meaning is the literal or formal meaning of a word. For instance, the term dog denotes an animal with fur, 4 legs, and a tail. The connotative meaning is not part of the official dictionary definition. The emotions and associations connected to a word are known as its connotative meaning, depending on how a word has been used over time. It may have a positive, negative, or neutral connotation. A word whose connotation is neither positive nor negative. For example, when speaking about a pet, the word dog has a neutral connotation, but the word mutt has a negative connotation, and the word purebred has a positive connotation. For your task today, read the sentences below. Circle the words having the negative connotation. Number 1. Tondo is a gritty neighborhood, but the rents are low. Number 2. On my flight to Cebu, I sat next to this babe. She was beautiful. Number 3. Every morning, my neighbor takes his mat to the park. It always barks loudly when leaving the building. 4. You need to be pushy when you are looking for a job. And number 5, Bob is bull-headed sometimes, but he always gets the job done. Now let us check the correct answer. Number 1, gritty. Number 2, babe. Number 3, mutt. Number 4, pushy. And number 5, bull-headed. Now it's time to exercise your mind in thinking and analyzing our lesson for today. Author's bias. An important part of evaluating an author's ethos is identifying that author's bias. Bias is any opinion that influences a person's thoughts, feelings, or actions. A person can be biased against something or have a bias for something. An author's bias is an opinion or prejudice that affects that author's writing and prevents the author from being completely neutral about the topic or issue about which he or she is writing. How to determine the author's bias? The author may state directly some of his or her biases by telling the reader his or her opinions on certain topics or admitting that he or she has a conflict of interest or preference. But when an author does not acknowledge his or her own bias, a reader can infer what an author's bias may be by looking at the author's diction. When looking at the author's diction, does the author use words with more negative connotations when referring to one side of an issue or particular people? For example, negative. Let's just say she's dumb. Is that what you're reading? Your interest sure or weird? Before he makes any purchases, Billy likes to do his research. He's so cheap. At work and at home, she's very egotistical. To be simple or simple-minded probably means you're very sweet, but not the smartest person in the room. To be labeled as flat-out dumb is not only hurtful, but deliberately insulting. Uniqueness is a bit like prettiness. There's nothing wrong with being special. Weird, however, carries a very negative undertone. When we think of someone economical, we tend to consider them to be logical and wise. Meanwhile, cheap is a derogatory term for someone stingy. Determined, assertive, confident. Each of these labels carries a positive connotation. They indicate a go-getter. However, once someone slips from confident to egotistical, they are no longer an inspiration to be around. Now it's time for an activity. Reminder for everyone that your answer in this activity will be checked by your English teacher. Activity 1. Read the paragraphs and answer the questions after each paragraph. For each paragraph, determine what the author's bias is by looking for pattern in the author's diction, connotations, and the use of evidence. This paragraph examines the effects of beauty on people's, particularly women's, lives. Men's looks matter to heterosexual women only somewhat. Most women prefer men who are taller than they are, with symmetrical features, a sign that a potential partner is healthy and parasite-free. But women across cultures are intent on finding a male partners with high status, power, and access to resources, which means a short guy can add maybe a foot to his height with a private jet. And just like women who aren't very attractive, men who make very little money or are chronically out of work tend to have a really hard time finding partners. There is some male grumbling about this. Yet, while feminist journalists deforest North America publishing articles urging women to bow out of the beauty arms race and learn to love that woman in the mirror, nobody gets into this ridiculous position of advising men to learn to love that unemployed guy sprawled on the couch. Now, before you brand me a traitor to my gender, let me say that I am all for women having the vote, and I think a woman with a mustache should make the same money like a man with a mustache. But you don't help that woman by advising her No need to wax that lip French or work off that beer belly. Because the road to female empowerment is looking just like a hairy old man? Question number 1. To whom the author is biased for or against? Number 2. What are the negative connotative words used by the author that show bias? Number 3. What are the positive connotative words used by the author that show bias? Recognizing biases. Look for loaded words. Words that are charged with emotion, whether positive or negative, can reveal an author's opinion about his or her topic. For example, terror, terrorist, freedom, sex, gay, reason, and radical. Watch out for stereotypes. If the author labels an entire group, the writing is probably biased. For examples, all teenagers are rebels. All Asians are good at math. All Asians like to eat rice and drive slow. Men are strong and do all the work. Notice beige language or generalizations. If the author isn't using specific language, this could be an indicator of bias. Be on the lookout for one-sided arguments. If the author only presents one side of an argument, his or her writing is probably biased. Example, informing volunteers only about the benefits of the vaccine, but not explaining the side effects or risks associated with it. Does the author present facts or opinions? Facts are what they are, the truth. Opinions, on the other hand, can be based on feelings, emotions, or prejudice. And that's the end of our lesson for today. But before we say goodbye, I would like to give you a task to be accomplished. Activity 2. Read the paragraph below. Circle the loaded words. Box the stereotyping words. Underline the generalizing words. Line erase the one-sided arguments. And bracket the author's opinion. When I met with Mayor Gomez, I noticed that he had the appearance of a hobo. He was unshaven activity and wearing dirty clothes. He spoke to me about his horrible plan to fix our city's roads. Anyone who knows the plan will tell you that it will bankrupt our city. The plan to fix our roads mostly benefits friends of the mayor. He plans to pay his buddies in the construction business thousands of dollars over the next 2 years. I do not want to insult anyone, but the mayor is of Italian descent. And we all know what reputation they have in the part of the country. Need I remind you of Al Capone and other Italian mafia members? Remember, an author's bias is an opinion or prejudice that affects that author's writing and prevents the author from being completely neutral about the topic or issue about which he or she is writing. To determine the author's bias, a reader must look at the author's negative connotations and positive connotations when referring to one side of an issue or particular people. These connotations are another clue to what or whom the author may be biased for or against. Another is looking at the author's use of negative evidence and positive evidence for one side of an issue than the other. In recognizing bias, a reader should look for loaded words, watch out for stereotypes, notice vague language or generalizations. Be on the lookout for one-sided arguments and personal opinions. Checking your understanding. Complete the table by supplying examples of the terms that determine an author's bias. Negative connotations, positive connotations, stereotypes, loaded words, vague language. Post-test. Direction. Read the paragraphs, sentences, and answer the questions that follow. Number 1. Parents always talk about how if schools had uniforms, everything would be so much easier. You wouldn't get caught up on looks and would learn the skills you need. Fewer students would be victims of bullying or teasing, which would increase their self-esteem. I think that school uniforms would put a restriction on our creativity. We dress the way we do for a certain reason. Clothes give us expression and the ability to use color and patterns. If we all wear the same thing, a blonde, ugly uniform, we don't get to see what people are like on the inside. Clothes don't distract us from learning. They simply let us inspire our imaginations, and that can be a huge boost to one's confidence. Questions: to whom the author is biased against or for? What are the connotative words used by the author that show bias? Which of the following did you recognize in the paragraph? Loaded words, stereotypes, page language, or generalizations? One-sided arguments, or personal opinions? Number 2. New cars are not built as well as they used to be. Owners of new cars in 2002 have more complaints about their automobiles than in past years. The recalling of new cars by their makers is becoming a routine practice in America. Instead of insisting upon safe, well-designed products, car makers seem more concerned with throwing together showy automobiles and making a profit. Invariably, new cars need parts replaced almost as soon as the warranty expires. Unfortunately, people need transportation, so they continue to buy new automobiles. To whom the author is biased against or for? What are the connotative words used by the author that show bias? Which of the following did you recognize in the paragraph? Loaded words, stereotypes, vague language or generalization, one-sided arguments, or personal opinions? For reflection, I want you to search the web for viral fake news. Write a reaction to the author's bias.
Thank you, grade 8 learners. I hope that you learned something new today. Thank you for watching and keep safe always.